All right, but first, I'd like to first start to get what your views are on the comments by the EU Observer Mission.
Yes, I think the EU comments are generally, very reflective of the situation. The election, in a sense, is a step back from the previous successes, the previous gains of the Nigeria's democracy, and there is a need for very serious and very urgent electoral reforms.
All right, then. But when you look at the allegations made there on the Nigerian military, it speaks a whole volumes about understanding the tenets of democracy between all the stakeholders involved in the election process.
Yes, indeed, it does. We also think that it's not just electoral reforms that are necessary. At least 4 major steps need to be taken after this election. First of all, there has to be sanctions and punishments for offenses and impunity. This has been a recurrent issue in previous elections, and the failure to punish and to sanction has been an incentive for the recurrent offenses and the violence. So first of all, there has to be a justice approach to the outcome of the elections. And then secondly, of course, as the EU said, extensive and urgent electoral reforms. But then thirdly, there has to be a review of the role of security agencies, in elections. We're very concerned about the very intrusive role of the military in this particular election. And then, but fourthly, we think that the major issue is about politicians themselves and the very low level of acceptance of democratic values within the parties and by the candidates. So there's a whole lot of work that needs to be done.
All right, then. So you're talking about the character of the politicians in there. But I'd like to look beyond voter education now and speak to possibly a reorientation of all the players, from the INEC officials to the people who are holding key responsibilities, talking about the regional electoral commissioners, and then even the ad hoc staff. Do you think that because this reorientation is quite needed, even for the security personnel involved, the police and the army, so as to understand what their role is properly in the situation in an election?
Yes, I totally agree. There's a need for very extensive and very massive reorientation, and it has to be sustained. I think part of the problem is that we look at election as an event, and we just get to the eve of the election and try to prepare everybody for it. It's much more than that. It's a long haul. The military and the police and the security agencies need to be reorientated continuously, not only about elections, but about their relation to civil society, about their relation to the public. Politicians, we don't have to wait for the elections before we start telling them to behave well. There has to be a continuous process of imbibing and encouraging democratic values. The same thing applies to INEC. It needs to do a lot more about staff recruitment and staff training. The idea of gathering people at the last moment, the idea of ad hoc staff. Yes, we can't quite understand the constraints and why that has to be done, but the training has to be a little deeper than it has been, and the oversight has to be more intensive than what we saw the last time.
All right, then. Let's look at some of the flashpoints here, because I understand you were talking interestingly earlier about, the need for sanctions and punishments. But there's some states we've always known that have been, known for having violent elections, and I'm thinking if we had proper sanctions over time, I'm talking specifically now about Rivers State in Nigeria, I'd like to, get your views on how you think areas such as this that have a history of electoral violence, how you think this can be thwarted in the near future.
Well, first of all, I would like to say it's a fairly dynamic situation. The flashpoints change from time to time. While Port Harcourt, has seemed to be a constant on the list, but the situation changes from one election to another. For this particular election, we did publish that the International Crisis Group, 6 states to watch, and Port Harcourt was one of them. There were other areas, Akwa Ibom State and 4 others. The point is that for areas that have been identified as volatile, in the period preceding an election, certain steps have to be taken. First, the intelligence the security services have to improve on their intelligence in order to detect and prevent and preempt violence. It's not waiting until the elections. We can get some intelligence about which groups are mobilizing, which politicians are recruiting thugs and so on, and neutralize them, well ahead of the elections. There's also the need for civil society engagement in dialogue and confidence building and reducing tensions ahead of the elections. It was more effective in some states, not as effective in Rivers State. And then, of course, again, the leading politicians in those particular places playing according to the rules. What we have seen in Rivers State, again, is about leading politicians not playing to the rules and, aggravating the situation on ground. So those are some of the issues that will have to be addressed, in future elections.
All right, so more or less looking at homegrown solutions, to help tackle these homegrown problems in here. But I'd like to look at the 8 states that had inconclusive elections, quite a number of them on the list, about 6 of them in there. So we know that the Independent Electoral Commission will fix a date for the rerun elections. But what comes to mind quickly was the last major rerun election that we had, which was Osun State. Do you think we're going to see a similar outcome from what happened in Osun State?
Well, it will depend on INEC a great deal. There's a real fear of that. I've spoken with people in some of these states, and they seem to be convinced that this is just a delay tactic for, something more sinister that is, probably being planned. But INEC needs to work hard to dispel that impression. Some states might go like Osun State, others, may not. The important thing at the end of the day is to run a thoroughly transparent process in which people can see that there is no manipulation and there is no partiality in favor of any party. The rules are clear about, the conditions for declaring an election inconclusive, and if those if those conditions have arisen, then INEC is right in declaring inconclusive. But going forward, it then needs to conclude in a very transparent manner that would leave no doubt about, the true situation.
All right, then. All right, finally, I'd like you to comment on the election petitions and how much this helps to deepen our democracy.
I think some of them are very useful. The court rulings in some of the earlier cases have been very, landmark judgments that have helped to clarify the democratic, system and process. So to that degree, they are useful. But there are also cases, where people, put up frivolous petitions just because they thought they should have won the election, and then they waste the time of the tribunal. But I think just basically we must accept that people who feel that, they have been wronged, people who feel that they have been robbed, people who feel that they have been deprived of their electoral rights, they have a perfect right to approach the courts and get, a judgment. That is the essence of having a judicial system. There has to be a room for people seeking redress.
All right, thank you so much for your time today on